Good morning. This is Horizon's Middle East and Africa, our top stories this morning. Crude spike. Escalating tensions in the Middle East pushes up oil by 25% to smash through $115 a barrel as the ongoing conflict forces Gulf producers to curb output and divert exports from the Strait of Hormuz. Iran names Mojtaba Khamenei, the late Ayatollah's son, as its new supreme leader, in a defiant move signaling the regime will continue its hardline approach. And Iran continues its attacks on Gulf states as the U.S. State Department orders American employees and diplomats to leave Saudi Arabia. It's just gone 9 a.m. across the Emirates. I'm Johannesburg in Dubai, day 10 of the Iran war, and we are seeing a huge impact on markets today. Let's start there. The handover from Asia Pacific, a huge drawdown in some of these broader indices. The MSCI Asia Pacific as a whole down 5.3%. You're looking at losses of more than 7-8% on the Nikkei and the Kospi. As we pay close attention to the price action in oil, take a look at Brent now. $116. We have rallied 25% in the course of one day. So we're really getting to extremely high levels here. Not as high as we got to around Russia, Ukraine, but getting there. We're getting very close to it as we talk about ongoing attacks on energy infrastructure over the course of the weekend and more OPEC producers talking about reducing their production volumes. So all of that having a notable impact on energy markets this morning. We're going to discuss more on the show, obviously. The USD seeing a bid, a safe haven bid. We are up 0.6%. Money coming into the dollar. It's acting like a geopolitical safe haven. And so bucking the trend of weakness, obviously, that we saw for most of 2025. It's now resorted to being the currency that people want to own in time of crisis. And then 10-year yields, we also, another trend that we're seeing, not just for U.S. yields, but globally, yields around the world, is yields moving higher to account for this commodity shock, the energy shock, potential inflation down the track. 4.20 is where the 10-year yield is trading, about 7 basis points higher. And our colleague David Inglis flagging that there's only one interest rate cut priced in now in the U.S. curve for the rest of 2026. But let's switch over and talk about oil, just to give you a little bit of context about how big this jump was today. A move of north of 25%, a weekly record, and no surprise. It really shouldn't be a surprise that throughout the course of the week, last week, we saw a weekly record. And today, and I don't want to speak out of turn, but this 25% daily move, it probably has to be in one of the top daily moves ever, if not the biggest one. 25% surge in one day. And I think many people over the weekend were wondering where things were going to open up. And this is where we are right now. And if anything, these prices have continued to climb higher and higher throughout the course of the morning. Now, Iran has named Mojtaba Khamenei as its new supreme leader after what has been described as a decisive vote in the Assembly of Experts. In a statement, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has pledged full obedience to the new leader. The war, in its 10th day now, has caused the oil prices to surge, with Brent rising as much as 28% at one point to touch $119 a barrel. We were just talking about that. But U.S. President Donald Trump says rising oil prices is a small price to pay for the U.S. and the world's safety. Let's now bring in Stuart Livingstone-Wallace, Bloomberg's executive editor for Middle East, North Africa and Russia, and from Istanbul, Bloomberg's Patrick Sykes. Stuart, I'm going to start with you. Just walk us through the developments over the weekend, because there are really no signs that things are letting up at all or de-intensifying.
No, so we did have a little bit of a wobble when the Iranian president came out and appeared to say one thing but clearly didn't. As he was speaking, we still had missiles and drones coming into most of the Gulf states, and that continued throughout the weekend. And again, you've got sirens going off this morning in a few locations. So it doesn't feel like it's tailing off. The nature of the attacks have changed, and we have seen a dramatic drop-off in the number of missiles being fired, but the drones seem pretty relentless. On the other hand, it must be said for balance that by and large the Gulf countries have been incredibly successful at intercepting those incoming missiles and drones. And yes, there has been damage. Yes, there have been a few deaths, but relative to the onslaught that we've seen over the last 10 days, it's been quite remarkable. And you know yourself from here that life, more or less, is carrying on as normal. Yeah,
that is true. Patrick, let me ask you about this new supreme leader, the son of the former supreme leader. What do we know about Mojtaba Khamenei? And is this just a continuity choice?
I think we can look at him as basically the ultimate continuity candidate, right? Besides being his father's son, we know that he's close to the IRGC. They, of course, being the main military force that will be fighting the current war. We also know that he claims to have contacts over his career with the other parts of Iran's so-called axis of resistance, those groups of proxies around the region, from Lebanon's Hezbollah to Hamas. They've all held meetings with him. So for the regime that's obviously under bombardment at the moment, it's a message of complete defiance to Trump, who's obviously signaled regime change. It's a message that we're not going anywhere. You can take out the top guy, but there's another one to take his place, and he's going to be just as hardline, if not more, and close to the military.
Patrick, Stuart just referenced this now. Walk us through exactly what happened on Saturday with the president coming out in the morning and actually offering an apology to Gulf allies and saying that he has instructed armed forces not to attack or launch missiles at neighboring countries unless attacked from there. But of course, at the same time, the attacks continued, and we heard later on in the afternoon from other voices within the regime actually defying what he had said earlier on in the day. So what actually went down on Saturday within Iran?
Yeah, I think it really points to the divided and factional nature of the state, right? Particularly when, at that point, there wasn't a new supreme leader in charge. As you say, Pezeshkian, the president, came out and apologized to those Gulf states. Then various other officials from the military, from politics, all came out adopting a much harder line, saying, A, those attacks would continue, in one case saying that those countries would never be safe as long as those US bases in the region are still present there. So ultimately the stance kind of hardened in the end. It kind of reminded me of the protest that we saw a few months ago, where the president, Pezeshkian, was the sort of conciliatory face to the public, apologizing for shortcomings in the economy that had sparked them and offering to improve things. But the next day, or simultaneously even, we would see the security forces clamping down on the protests. Now that we've got a new supreme leader, I think it's worth remembering that those armed forces Pezeshkian claimed to have ordered, they respond, they feed in ultimately to the supreme leader rather than the president. So now that that chain of command is in place, ultimately it's him, not the civilian leaders, that matter.
Patrick, do we have a better understanding of how much firepower Iran actually has left in order to continue to continue with their ongoing attacks at various Gulf countries and Israel, but also to give us an idea of how lengthy this war could be?
Yeah, Iran doesn't give particular numbers on that much debated stockpile, but it has said over the weekend that it could continue the war at the current rate for another 6 months. That is perhaps, no doubt, partially propaganda, but it is interesting. Iran's rhetoric has shifted to pointing out that that it's been holding back some of its higher tech, newer model missiles in the opening days of the war, and that we should expect to see more of those in the coming days. So it's a move to perhaps more selective targeting using higher tech weapons that it hopes will be able to do more damage.
So Patrick was just talking, Stuart, let me take this to you. Patrick's just talking about them reserving potentially some of their higher tech weapons, more strategic targets. And as we know, over the course of the weekend, continued attacks on energy infrastructure. And then also, one step further, the attack on the desalination plant in Bahrain.
Yeah, I mean, look, on the energy side, yes, there has been some damage, particularly Ras Tanura, I think, has a small amount of damage. The issue here is storage. So the fact that you haven't been able to get a lot of oil out means that the storage tanks are filling up. They didn't have a lot to start with in the way of capacity, and that's why they're having to sort of slow down production and, ultimately may have to shut in fields, which of course is going to be very problematic. On the desalination, there are something like 450 desalination plants across the Middle East. It is a vulnerability, for sure, but, at the moment, the attacks that we've seen have mostly been on the Iranian side. So, look, it's something we're going to watch going forward, but at least at the moment, it's a vulnerability. It doesn't yet appear to be a reality.
Okay. Stuart, thank you so much. Stuart Livingston-Wallace, Bloomberg's executive editor for Middle East, North Africa and Russia, and in Istanbul, Bloomberg's Patrick Sykes. Thank you. Well, Asian stock markets tumbling as crude oil surges above $115 a barrel for the first time since 2022. For more market insights, joining us is Anita Krishna Gupta, Wealthbrix Capital Partners CIO. Well, Anita, today is a day where the war, which is a regional war, has really become one of global economic consequences. How much of a catalyst do you think this is going to be, and how much is it going to set the tone for global markets in the days to come, so long as the war persists?
Good morning, Jumana. I think the first point I have to make is that everybody has to reset their expectations from where they saw global markets at the beginning of January, whether it's in terms of equity market performance, where we saw the USD, where we saw oil going, where we saw precious metals. There's a complete reset happening in markets. We have drawn up scenarios where conflict lasts for 2 weeks, 4 weeks, goes on to a few months, and goes on to a year. At this point, absolutely, it is all about oil, energy, infrastructure, besides, of course, the turbulence in the region and the lost human life. But it is about oil and the impact on global supply chains, on economies. And here we differentiate between oil importers and those that are self-sufficient in oil production.
Yeah. Anita, how does the world look different with the backdrop of oil north of $110?
Okay, so we've got oil. I mean, it's a bit, every time we start writing or talking, the oil price has moved up again. Now, when we are looking at the supply of oil globally, and you've got the Strait of Hormuz, which has about 14 million barrels which were being shipped, and the large importers are China, India. We've got the Asian countries, Japan, China, India, Korea, are all oil importers to a large extent of their oil demands. On the other hand, you've got the US, which is oil sufficient, Europe, which needs oil and LNG. And again, we've got LNG prices spiking. Now, the impact, as I've clearly said, is it's going to start impacting corporate margins. And this is going to be a global impact. Now, we're looking at corporate margins, and we began the year very positive on earnings growth. So we're going to see earnings growth impacted. Now, even if it is a short-term conflict, you're still going to see the impact. It's going to take time for oil production, for LNG production to come back into place. So at this point, I see global growth estimates being revised down. I see corporate earnings growth estimates being revised down.
Mm-hmm. Anita, are you changing the way your portfolio is positioned now and turning to more defensive sectors?
So at the moment, we look at the different profiles that we have. And if you look at balanced risk profile, we have an allocation to money market deposits, to fixed income. Fixed income, we have not changed our stance in terms of emerging market local currency bonds at this point. We are seeing spikes in treasury yields and all sovereign yields as the inflation specter comes into play. In terms of fixed income, we are still slightly overweight, a little bit more defensive on that front. In terms of equities, we have seen what's happened with the Asian markets. Asian markets were definitely a bet at the beginning of the year. We are going to be going, neutral on that front. I think that, we're going to have to even evaluate going a little bit underweight equity. We are being bulls for the last few years. I think that stance may have to change. We are absolute allocators to gold, even though we've seen gold fall a little bit again on the back of the fact that you're not going to see, real, yields at this point go up with inflation offsetting any, increase in treasury yields. So absolutely keep gold and silver in your portfolios. Be, diversified, very, very important. Do some, hedges to your portfolio in terms of, structures. So you do need to have some defensives. I'm not going to be speculative and say, go and buy oil. That's not something which we are saying right now.
Okay, Anita, let me just ask you one thing, because we had NFP figures come through on Friday, and I guess, everyone's attention is elsewhere now, but they did come in weaker than expectations. Is the Fed in a tricky position because of the ongoing backdrop of a weakening labor market, but now a supply and energy shock that they have to confront?
Absolutely. So every $10 increase in oil prices is about a 15%, increase in inflation. You also got the impact on economic growth. So you've got the Fed, which is going to be seeing slowing economic growth at the same time, a hike in inflation. You're probably going to see inflation back above the 3% handle if oil prices stay where they are. In the US, you've got, oil prices already above $5 a gallon. So where are we in terms of the Fed, in terms of rate cuts? That's going to be reevaluated. So again, cuts, yes, because growth is going to slow, but inflation stays to be, a big, sword hanging, around there. And again, you've got midterm elections coming up, and you would like the consumers to be happy. So we really are in a conundrum, and it's not something which just the Middle East is facing in terms of the economic impact. This is something which the whole world is going to see in terms of slowing economic global growth and changes in central bank policy.
Anita, thank you so much for joining us. Anita, Krishna Gupta, Wealthbrix Capital Partner, CIO. Coming up, we discuss Israel strikes in Lebanon targeting Hezbollah as Netanyahu targets its neighbor as well as Iran. That's next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Horizons Middle East and Africa. I'm Joanna Bersachi in Dubai. Israel is continuing its strikes in Lebanon as it targets Hezbollah. Hundreds of people have been killed and thousands have been displaced, and even hundreds of thousands per the latest figures. To discuss further, we're joined by Hilal Khashan, political science professor at the American University of Beirut. Good morning to you, sir. Is it fair to assume that the front in Lebanon, Israel's war now with Hezbollah, is going to continue so long as the broader Iran war continues as well?
Well, I think at this point, Israel's war on Hezbollah is unrelated to its war alongside with the U.S. on Iran. Now, this round of fighting between Israel and Hezbollah aims at uprooting Hezbollah, and the Israelis have made it very clear that they will not stop the war until they finish off Hezbollah as a fighting force.
What does that actually mean? What does it actually mean to finish off Hezbollah as a fighting force? What is the ultimate trajectory? What does the future of Hezbollah look like?
Well, at this point, I don't think Hezbollah has a future, neither its military component nor its political component. Most Lebanese are outraged because Hezbollah started its front against Israel on October 8, 2023, and since then, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu pledged that by the time the war is over, he would defeat Hezbollah and transform the Middle East. Hezbollah has spread within the Lebanese Shiite community, and it has established grassroots. Therefore, defeating Hezbollah and eliminating Hezbollah is going to be an arduous task, and it will take some time. I wouldn't be surprised if the front between Hezbollah and Israel outlasts the war in Iran, because, as I mentioned, Hezbollah established grassroots within the Shiite community who, for the most part, remain faithful and loyal to Hezbollah.
Okay, let me just go back to 2024, the ceasefire that was negotiated. Shortly afterwards, we saw the removal of the Assad regime, and for a while there was this understanding that perhaps that the linkages between Iran and Hezbollah had been severed, and you'd seen a massive decapitation, essentially, of Hezbollah leadership. But actually, what has transpired, and you fast forward to today, is you still have quite the presence and the influence of Iran, of the IRGC. There are reports that over the weekend, the IRGC were also being transferred out of Lebanon as well. How did that happen over the course of the last 18 months?
Well, the Assad regime was overthrown, and Hezbollah turned to become a defensive force after its leadership, both military and political, was eliminated. Now, the problem for Hezbollah is that it's unable to dissociate itself from the Iranian regime. Hezbollah subscribes to Iran's rule by the Juris Consult, and for them, a command from the religious superiors in Iran is binding, and therefore Hezbollah immediately opened a front against Israel after Israel and the U.S. assassinated the supreme leader a few days ago. So, I mean, the relationship between Hezbollah and Iran, even though the two sides have not been in contact for some time, and especially after last week's exodus of hundreds of Iranian officials and officers from Lebanon to Istanbul via a Russian military plane. Now, Hezbollah remains committed to the ideas of the Iranian Revolution and its symbols, even though the two sides are disconnected because of the transformations in the region, especially the transformation in Syria and the turning of the Syrian regime into an enemy over the past 16 months.
So can I just ask you, what hope there is for some of the diplomatic channels? We know that the Lebanese prime minister has reached out to the French president, President Macron, to work the diplomatic channels to bring the situation, to de-escalate the situation. How successful do you think those efforts are actually going to be?
Well, the Israelis say there is no room for diplomacy at this point. They have repeatedly told the Lebanese government to shoulder its responsibilities and disarm Hezbollah. But the Lebanese army is unable and unwilling to take on Hezbollah, because that would mean a civil war in Lebanon. True, Hezbollah is no match for Israel, but they are very well equipped to start a civil war in Lebanon. So Israel understands that the Lebanese government and the army will not fight Hezbollah. Therefore, Israeli Prime Minister said the other day that if Lebanon does not shoulder its responsibilities, then Israel will carry out the task of finishing off Hezbollah as a fighting force. And they have already begun this process.
Yeah. Hilal, Khashan, thank you so much for joining us, political science professor at the American University of Beirut. Now, Pakistan and Saudi Arabia are discussing joint steps to counter Iranian drone and missile attacks on the kingdom. Islamabad's army chief met Saudi defense minister to review the security situation and consider measures under their strategic mutual defense pact. Pakistan's foreign minister also spoke with Iran's foreign minister to exchange views on recent developments and agreed to remain in touch. Water desalination plants in Iran and Bahrain have come under attack, marking a serious escalation in the widening conflict. Iran's foreign minister accused the U.S. of striking a plant which disrupted water supplies to dozens of villages, a claim denied by U.S. officials. Bahrain, meanwhile, said an Iranian drone caused damage to a desalination facility, although authorities say water supplies do remain stable. Norwegian police are investigating whether an explosion outside the U.S. Embassy in Oslo is linked to the war in the Middle East. The blast caused minor damage with no casualties reported. Authorities there believe it's far too early to link the incident to the Iran war and are also considering other theories as well. Let's take a look at how U.S. equity futures are shaping up as we head into the European session. S&P futures down 1.6%, NASDAQ down 1.9%. But take a look at European markets. Futures there pointed substantially lower, down 2.4%. So really, we woke up this morning and the world looked very different. You have oil very close to $120. Now let's switch over and take a look at where crude and Brent are trading this morning. So Brent crude is at 20% higher, $112 is where we are now, so pulling back a little bit. And then WTI just shy of 109, so up 20% today in trading, obviously having global implications for markets. And we're going to talk a little bit more about where we go from here and what could actually stem the rise in oil prices. So coming up, as Israel continues strikes in Iran and Lebanon, we discuss what the endpoint of this war could look like for Netanyahu and his government with Miri Eisin, a retired Israeli Defense Forces colonel. That's next. This is Bloomberg. Good morning. This is Horizon's Middle East and Africa. Our top stories this morning. Crude spike, escalating tensions in the Middle East that pushes up oil 25% to smash through $115 a barrel at one point as the ongoing conflict forces Gulf producers to curb output and divert exports from the Strait of Hormuz. Iran names Mojtaba Khamenei, the late Ayatollah's son, as its new supreme leader, in a defiant move signaling the regime will continue its hardline approach. And Iran continues its attacks on Gulf states as the U.S. State Department orders American employees and diplomats to leave Saudi Arabia. It's just gone 9:30 a.m. across the Emirates. I'm Johanna Bersachi in Dubai. It is decisively risk-off today. The handover from Asian bourses very negative, as you can see behind me. MSCI Asia Pacific down 4.2%. At one point, we were down almost 5.5%. Nikkei, Kospi, we're talking there of losses of as much as 7 to 8% on the day as the market really comes to grips now with this global energy shock. And take a look at Brent prices. At one point, I believe earlier in the session, we touched 116, 117. We've pared back a little bit. We're still up 20% on the day, but some headlines just crossing in the last few minutes suggesting that an emergency G7 finance ministers meeting is going to be held today alongside the IEA, where they will be discussing the release of strategic petroleum reserves. So could be very crucial for markets. And obviously, where we go from here is going to be dependent on how much extra supply can be brought back to the market. And the release of these SPRs could help limit some of the upside to oil. So we're going to keep a close eye on what happens there. We'll speak about it shortly with Stephen, our reporter in Asia. The USD also seeing a bid this morning, up 0.3%. Flight to quality still going in to the greenback. And then 10-year yields continue to move higher to account for this inflationary shock that we're seeing around the world, up 5 basis points today, 4.20. There's only one rate cut priced into the U.S. yield curve now in the front end. The 2026 pricing only suggests that the Fed will cut once. Switching over, just a highlight for you, and this is not taking into consideration the price action today, but broadly speaking, just take a look at the huge jump in oil prices and energy prices that we had over the course of last week. It was up 25% throughout the course of the week just last week. And to put that into context, we're up 20% today. So a weekly record in terms of how much oil climbed last week. And I would think close to a daily record as well, given the move that we're seeing today. Okay, let's dig a little bit deeper into some of the price action in Asia as well. Winnie Su is in our Hong Kong studio. Winnie, walk us through these markets this morning.
Yeah, morning, Jomana. As you can see, pretty much all in the red. It is a very ugly day for Asian markets, as right now it's pretty much a sell everything but the dollar or oil story. And we are hearing more concerns when it comes to inflation and even stagflation as oil prices continue to surge. But key milestones to highlight for you, MXAP here down about 4%, and it did enter that technical correction level. And that's a similar milestone when it comes to Taiwan and the Philippines, while for Indonesia in a bear market. So overall, it is a lot of vulnerability when it comes to Asia, and we're hearing regulators stepping in, whether it's the trading in on the Kospi or also capping oil prices, as well as stepping up their stabilization efforts. Now, flip the board and take a look at the CPI and PPI numbers from China, as it's also related to the surge in oil prices. When it comes to CPI, interestingly, a pretty big beat. We're looking at 1.3% gains for February year over year. That's beating the 0.2% in the previous month, and also an estimate of 0.9%. As we mentioned, thanks to the surge in oil prices and also the demand during the holiday. When it comes to PPI, seeing a bit of relief when it comes to the factory deflationary pressure, down just 0.9% versus a decline of 1.4% in the previous month. But overall, we're expecting the inflationary pressure to continue with the higher energy prices. Back to you, Jomana.
Overview, Winnie Su in Hong Kong. Well, oil was soaring towards $120 a barrel, has pulled back a little bit now. Brent is now at $110 a barrel. After the war shows no signs of abating. That's as more major Middle East producers are curbing production, and the Strait of Hormuz remains all but closed. For more, We are joined by Stephen Sachinsky, who leads our energy coverage in Asia. So much to talk about this morning, but I'm just going to bring you the latest lines that have been crossing, because markets are reacting to this FT article saying that G7 finance ministers will be discussing a possible joint release of the SPR reserves. Now, significant. I was going to start off by asking you what could cap the upside in oil here. How far away, how far along could this go if we start seeing some of these G7 countries actually release some of their strategic reserves?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is what the market had been waiting for. We heard some rumblings about this last week when we had Japanese refiners pushing their government to release their oil reserves. But the best way to have an impact on the market is not to do it by country to by country. It's to do it strategically and together, jointly with the IEA. That's kind of why they're there, right? That's one of their big purposes. I think the most interesting aspect of this FT report is that it says that 3 of the G7 countries support it, including the United States. They're citing people with knowledge of the discussions. And I think what you have to look at is this could be a bandage, right? This is obviously market is reacting, but you're not seeing a total reversal. We're still at $110 Brent. We're still up a huge 20%. So this is something that will help kind of deal with the intensity of these increases. This will help to provide some relief for the market. But again, it is just a temporary sort of relief. The big issue is the Strait of Hormuz, which supplies 20% of seaborne oil. If that remains shut, if there's no end to the conflict in sight, then every day this is closed. That's less oil that's in the market. And that's just going to be higher prices for consumers, especially those in Asia.
And we hear of some producers, the likes of Saudi Arabia, leaning on that east-west pipeline. There's also the Fujairah pipeline as well for the UAE. I mean, can these alternative routes also help cushion the blow in terms of getting oil out to the market?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly what you say, it is a cushion, right? It is not, you cannot meet the same production. So if you were to use, for Saudi Arabia, alternative routes, at best you can get half of the oil that you were getting out from their main exports from the Persian Gulf. So you're not able to get the same amount, but certainly you're able to redirect some flows. That will add some security to the market. You know, the oil is still flowing, but the fact of the matter is, it won't be able to replace what goes through the Strait of Hormuz. I think likewise, the market is not just focused on that alternative routes. They're also looking at, okay, what's the storage levels like? Because over the weekend, we were hearing from Kuwait, from ADNOC, that they're kind of adjusting, potentially or also reducing their output to deal with basically tank top or close to high inventory levels. And then also the retaliatory things that are happening out of Iran when they're sending drones to refineries still, to oil infrastructure, towards major oil fields. Well, we haven't had another big, it seems, large oil field or anything go offline. Because of that, that risk still remains in the market. And every time there is an attack, it puts everyone on edge. Because if you were to open up the Strait of Hormuz tomorrow, when you have most of the infrastructure intact and you're still producing a little bit, you can ramp back up. But once you shut production or facilities are damaged, suddenly you're talking about bringing in a commissioning crew to restart some of these facilities. You're talking about repairs, maintenance. That's not a weeks of outage. That could drag into months.
Yeah, so it's easier to operate at low capacity than at no capacity, essentially. Stephen Sachinsky, who leads our energy coverage in Asia. Thank you so much. Israel says around 400 targets have been hit across western and central Iran in a day. The country's energy minister says targets including oil refineries and power stations were on the table. Meanwhile, Iran's semi-official Fars news agency reports that Israeli jets have targeted oil depots in Tehran, as well as the nearby city of Karaj. To discuss further, we're joined by Miri, Eisin, retired Israeli Defense Forces colonel. Good morning to you. Let me start off by asking you how you would characterize the military success so far of these joint U.S.-Israeli operations.
The action itself that has been taken jointly by the United States and Israel is against a variety of targets all over Iran. Success number one is that there's absolute air superiority. Jumana, that's not a little thing. It means that the US and Israeli air capabilities can pretty much attack the different targets all over Iran. They've been targeting the missiles, the depots, the arsenals, and of course the different aspects of the Islamic regime at the heart of Tehran and around. Until now, very, very, when I say successful, that's never nice and it's never happy. This is a war, but it's targeting those different targets, going after those different capabilities. And of course, Iran still has a lot of capabilities that they've been building for the last 45 years to use.
Can I just ask you how the labor is being divided between the US and the IDF at this point?
It's a joint operation. I mean, the extent to what we can talk about it in that sense is what you do is you divide, if I could call it that way, the airspace above Iran into different areas. The United States has been very focused on what you were talking about before, which is the whole aspect of the closing of the Persian Gulf, of the Hormuz Strait, which means they've been going after both the Navy and the different sites that I would call are more in southern Iran, southeastern Iran, the ones that are closer to the Persian Gulf. Israel has been very focused on the missiles and on the targets of the Islamic regime itself. That's Tehran, that's to the north. So I'd say that Israel is active more in the north and in the west, and the United States more in the south and in the east. But at the end, it's a coordinated joint attack, which means that they're constantly talking to each other.
And yet yesterday, the IDF hit fuel depots in Tehran, and there have been multiple reports overnight suggesting that the U.S. were not convinced that this is the right course of action. The Senator, Lindsey Graham, going one step further, urging Israel to be cautious about targets, saying our goal is to liberate Iranian people in a fashion that does not cripple their chance to start a new and better life. Talk to us about exactly what Israel's goal here and whether it wants to fully dismantle state infrastructure or actually give the Iranian people a chance for a future.
To be able to give the Iranian people a chance for the future, you need to dismantle the Islamic regime's capability, and you can do so up to a point from this air superiority. You and I both understand that that's not something that you can do from above. The people have to do that from below. When it comes to the targeting itself, you know what, Jumana, the way I'm going to put it is that I'm going to separate the military absolute joint coordination, acting together, looking at all these different targets, and between the rhetoric at the end, it's both, midterms in the United States. It's an election year inside Israel. So I'm going to separate what the leaders say and what the military does in their actions. The Islamic regime have attacked all of the different Gulf states, as you were talking about before. They've been targeting all of the different types of infrastructure, of oil, of gas, of desalination, and those countries did absolutely nothing, were not participating, did nothing. And I think that in that case here, it's to point out also to the Islamic regime that they don't have free reign. This is not about they're doing whatever they want. And I think also in the fact that we need to show that when they do these kind of attacks, they are going to get that in return. The specific oil depots were the ones that are used by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, by the Air Force. It was the ones that were tapped in for them. It's not the ones that were for general use. And that would be true of all the different type of targets. It doesn't make it any easier, not for the people in Tehran, not for the Iranian people, but that's going to be part of the targeting. Anything that's the Islamic regime that empowers them, that gives them that strength, those are the targets that needs to be hit, that need to be there, to weaken them, to help the Iranian people.
Is it your assessment that political objectives are being achieved? I mean, we've spoken about your characterization of how the military operations are going, but politically, Iran continued to be defiant, and they've appointed a new supreme leader who's essentially a continuity candidate from the prior supreme leader. How successful have these operations been so far politically?
So in that sense, in attacking the different targets themselves, it does go in stages, and nothing is something that immediately happens. What we're looking at right now is a weakening, a diminishing, and that's important that the Iranian people themselves can see that. Jumana, it isn't that they're now all going to stand up and overthrow it. The hold of that Islamic regime is very strong. I think that in the victory that I'm looking at in that political aim is that the Islamic regime will not be focused in its top priority on nuclear, missiles, proxies, the annihilation of Israel, but perhaps on their own people, on building a country. And if that's with an Islamic way, that's their choice. But right now, their top priorities for over 40 years has been about building the proxies, the missiles, the nuclear, and the annihilation of Israel. And I do think that there is a change in that sense in what they're going to be able to do no matter what afterwards because of these attacks, because of the diminishing of their strength.
Miri Eisin, retired Israeli Defense Forces colonel, thank you so much for joining the show today.
Thanks.
Well, coming up, the U.S. State Department orders American employees and diplomats in Saudi Arabia to leave the country. We'll discuss potential business impact with Imad Al-Abdulqader, partner at DGA-Albright Stonebridge Group. Next, this is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Horizons Middle East and Africa. I'm Jumana Versace in Dubai. The U.S. State Department has ordered American employees and diplomats in Saudi Arabia to leave the country, citing safety risks. The move comes as Iranian attacks across the Gulf continue and as fears of a broader conflict continues to grow. Joining us now to talk about the business impact is Imad Al-Abdulqader, partner at DGA-Albright Stonebridge Group. Thank you for joining us, and your safety is of utmost importance to us. I'm just going to start off by asking you, how is the mood on the ground today in Riyadh?
Good morning, Jumana. Riyadh the mood is normal, life is normal. This is a school vacation, and it certainly feels like it. It's the end of Ramadan, and the normal Ramadan activities are all going on. Luckily, Riyadh has been spared the intensity of attacks that other parts of the GCC has seen. So for most Saudis, life does feel normal. People are, of course, concerned of the future development of where this conflict is heading and what are the longer-term effects of it. But at least in the short term, not a lot of effects are felt today in Riyadh.
It's interesting. I was looking at the performance of the Saudi Tadawul, that is the Saudi main stock exchange, and it's actually up 1.5% since the war broke out. So one of the major beneficiaries has been Aramco. What do you make of this dislocation between how financial markets are behaving versus actually, the sheer number of projectiles that the Saudi Ministry of Defense has had to intercept over the course of this war?
Because investors, whether it's in the financial markets or in other instruments, will need to balance the long-term and the short-term implications, the good and the bad, the opportunities and the risks of the significant developments that we are seeing. The stock market naturally will react to a surge in oil prices because that has a spillover effect, even if the quantities that are exported are less than usual. That is more than made up for by the change in price. Of course, it also reflects an element of confidence in the future from the Saudi stock market. People do believe that Saudi Arabia at least will, and I think this applies to other GCC countries as well, after overcoming this immediate effects of the crisis, will continue on its economic reform, will be even further towards diversification of the economy. The motivation to diversify is even stronger now. The motivation to localize industry is even stronger. So there is a clear push towards more economic activity inside the kingdom.
Do you worry about the longer-term consequences of this? And one of the key pillars of Saudi 2030 is attracting FDI, attracting capital into the kingdom. Is there concern about how the events over the last 10 days has reshaped the world's image of the Gulf?
Well, of course, this is a major incident that is affecting the whole world, not only Saudi Arabia, not only the GCC. the whole world is affected by this, and you've covered it just a few minutes ago, as clearly demonstrated that the immediate clear effects on the effects of the logistics, the shipping in the Gulf, the oil production, petrochemical production, is going to have ripple effects over the supply chains of the world. But of course, in the region itself, there definitely will need to be a reassessment by investors and balancing of the risks and opportunities. The challenge is understanding where the future is heading and what will happen in Iran in the future. There is a wide spectrum of possibilities, wide spectrum of scenarios that investors need to take into account, and the potential for a sustained conflict inside Iran or with Iran. And of course, that is not good for business. Business and stability go together. However, if we take a few steps back and remember that the GCC has been successful over the past decades to maintain its position as a prosperous, peaceful part of the world, despite the decades of conflict that the Gulf has seen and the region has seen. So since the early 80s, when the Iraq-Irani Gulf was a threat to the whole region and caused a lot of economic impact, the Gulf has built in a lot of resiliency. The resiliency has been only increased over the decade with each conflict, and in anticipation of conflicts, the East-West pipeline has had a huge effect today in keeping the prices where they are. That could have been much worse if it has not been for that built-in resiliency. And it's not only the East-West pipeline, it's all oil production, petrochemical production, and other infrastructure that benefits from a lot of resiliency that is built in because of this continuous tension in the Gulf.
Imad, Al-Abdulqader, thank you so much for joining us, partner at DGA-Albright Stonebridge Group. Well, for more of these stories looking into the intersection of wealth and power in the region, sign up for our Mideast Money newsletter on Bloomberg.com. Egypt's pound has fallen to a record low, posting its biggest single-day drop since its devaluation 2 years ago. The currency slid as regional tensions tied to the Iran war weighed on investor sentiment. The Egyptian stock market also extended losses, adding to pressure on an economy already grappling with high inflation and heavy import dependence. China is calling for an immediate ceasefire in the Middle East and a return to negotiations. Beijing's special envoy met Gulf and Saudi officials in Riyadh, urging all sides to halt fighting and condemning attacks on civilians and non-military targets. Australia's government says it's assessing a request from Gulf nations for defensive military support to protect them against Iranian drone and missile attacks. Foreign Minister Penny Wong declined to say exactly what Australia might provide, while pledging transparency if a decision is made. She added that Australia would not take part in offensive action or deploy ground troops in Iran. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer says he's prepared to support households as oil prices surge back above $100 a barrel for the first time since 2022. With the Iran conflict driving energy costs higher, Starmer said easing the cost of living pressure on working families is a top priority. And let's switch on and talk about some of the market movements that we're seeing this morning, because we have seen a huge uptick in the price of oil. At one point, we were up almost to $120 on Brent. We've pulled back, but I'm going to get there in a moment. Take a look at what Europe is set out to open at, down 2.4% for these European futures. The Stock 600 also pointing to a much weaker open as well. Across the board, the FTSE 100 relatively immune because of the dominance of some of those miners and commodities names on the index. So more of a defensive play here, but that is the setup for the European Open. And as we talk more broadly about equity futures as well, we are seeing a massive risk-off session this morning. S&P futures leaning towards the red, NASDAQ also leaning towards the red. And this is where you have it, down 1.8%. Let's switch over. I do want to show you oil as well. Brent very much in focus. We are now sitting at around $109. We've pulled back after this FT report citing that there's going to be an emergency G7 finance minister meeting to release strategic stockpiles. So let's see what happens with that. We're still up 17% on the day. That's it for Horizons Middle East and Africa. I'm Johanna Bersetchi in Dubai.